Hi, my name is McKenna Hoyman, and my presentation is on epilepsy. So, what is epilepsy? Epilepsy is a neurological condition that a ton of people suffer from. This condition is caused by neurons in your brain firing wrong, which ends up causing a seizure. So, everyone's neurons in their brain fire signals to the rest of their body and tell it what to do. But people with epilepsy, their neurons either fire too quickly or give the wrong signal, which ends up causing a seizure. There are many different forms of epilepsy, which we will talk about a little bit later. There are different forms of seizures and different forms of epilepsy that can vary by every single person. So, types of epilepsy. There is epilepsy caused by the de novo gene, which is a gene that is not genetic and causes a mutation, but it is not a genetic mutation. And there is also unknown causes. Childhood epilepsy, there is juvenile myoclonic epilepsy and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which this is a lifelong syndrome that people have to live with and is noticed when they are walking normally. There are many different types of childhood epilepsy, but those are just two of them. And there is four main types of epilepsy, and the names of them are related to the area where the seizures take place. So the names of the four are absent epilepsy, frontal lobe epilepsy, temporal lobe epilepsy, and neocortical epilepsy, which each one of those have different outcomes of what the symptoms are. But those are the four main types that people with epilepsy are classified under. So the cause of epilepsy, there are many different causes. However, these are the more common ones. So genetics, it can be inherited. However, most cases are not. Head trauma such as a TBI or traumatic brain injury. This can be anything from a car accident to just getting hit in the head too hard. Brain issues such as like formation of the brain, and this also falls under developmental factors as well, where certain factors will influence it, whether that be too many blood vessels forming together or blood vessels forming wrong. Infections such as HIV or meningitis can lead to epilepsy, and in utero brain injury. So this would be if something happened to the mother while she was pregnant and then in result ended up with a brain injury to the fetus. So some symptoms, these are, again, a wide variety for every person, but these are some of the more common ones. There is confusion, staring spells, rigid muscles, uncontrollable movements, loss of consciousness, and psychological symptoms. Those psychological symptoms might be like extreme fear, extreme anxiety, things along those lines. Some warning signs of seizures, auras, which this is also common with other disorders and conditions such as like migraines. A stomach feeling, which this would be like the knotting in your stomach that you like kind of know something's wrong or going to happen. Dizziness, loss of balance, unknown fear and anxiety, which we kind of talked about before with symptoms. And a less common one, but is possible, is hallucinations. There are a few more on this picture if you want to pause the video for a minute and look a little bit further. So different types of seizures. So as there are different types of epilepsy, there are also different types of seizures. There are focal seizures, which if you look at the picture on the right here, that makes up 60%. And there's two main types of those. So the two main types of focal seizures would be referred to based off of their placement. So such as like focal frontal lobe. So you're having a focal seizure that's happening in your frontal lobe. This is, like I said, the more common type. However, there is also generalized seizures, which these are more classified by the effects because they happen to the whole brain. So there are 6 to 7 different types, depending on what sources you look at, and those make up 30% of people with epilepsy. I have 7 that I found, but 6 are more common. So the 6 more common ones would be absent seizures, tonic seizures, clonic seizures, myoclonic seizures, atonic seizures, and tonic-clonic seizures. The last one that makes up that 7th one is called secondary generalized seizures. So this is kind of a combination when you have a focal and then a generalized seizure after the fact. And 10% are unknown. So this would be if they can't find a source of it or there aren't specific consistent symptoms for each seizure. As with many other conditions and disorders, there are triggers for this. So some triggers would be stress levels, alcohol intake or drug intake, dehydration or lack of eating, hormone levels, whether they're spiking or falling, lack of sleep, and visual stimulation. So visual stimulation would be things such as strobe lights. That's why they always give the epilepsy warning at places that have strobe lights. So for diagnosis, it is a long process to get diagnosed with epilepsy. If they think that you have epilepsy, you can do different imaging to see what kind of seizures you're having, where they're located, and diagnose that focal versus general. Some of the imaging that can be done is a EEF or EEG, an SEEG, a CT, an MRI, a PET scan, or a SPECT scan. So these are all forms of imaging. There are also blood tests that can be done. This can be for genetic factors, as well as infection. And there is also neuropsychological tests that can help see how the body is affected by the epilepsy or the seizures. So treatment options, there is no set cure, but there are treatment plans that come in place with epilepsy. Some of those would be medication. This is a daily medication that people can take, some diet changes, some lifestyle changes. There are surgeries that if you have a focal seizure, they could potentially remove part of that brain tissue in order to help alleviate those seizures. But none of these are cures, as I said. And there are also devices that could potentially be implanted, which these are similar to like a pacemaker and something along those lines that would help either stop them from happening or send certain triggers to help alleviate the symptoms. Newest advancements in epilepsy and the study of epilepsy. I found 4 specific ones, but there are a ton and it's constantly changing. So Epilepsy 4000 is the analysis that they did of 4,000 people with epilepsy and the family members to help determine what the gene was that was causing the inherited epilepsy. This is actually now a worldwide effort that is now backed by the Human Genome Project. There is also the SUDEP, which is sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And this is studied in the United States and England in different institutions right now. The EpiBio S4RX is human and animal studies to see how epilepsy developed after a TBI happened and seeing if there's certain biomarkers that would help us predict if someone that has a TBI would end up with epilepsy. And the last one I found was EpiMVP. This is finding genetic variations with uncertain significance. So we don't know exactly what their significance is, but we're trying to find a connection to see if it has relevance to epilepsy. There's also a ton of epilepsy research happening, and it's constantly evolving and changing the more we find out and the more data we can add. So looking into gene sequencing is part of what's happening right now. This is seeing like genetic factors, underlying contributions such as biological contributions to epilepsy and how it's influencing, animal models to gain different insight into how epilepsy would affect a human. This is also helping new therapies, which is a little bit further down on the list, but with the animal models, we are also coming up with new therapies, and that's assisting in that. Analysis of a brain tissue. This would be if you had that seizure that a certain part of the brain was taken out, they can do analysis of that tissue. Or if the deceased had given consent prior to death to use their brain for science, they can also do that. And AI, which is artificial intelligence. That's the new thing in the world right now, but we're seeing if it is helping with the medical field as well to help give insight that our human brain might not come up with, but help aid in the medical field. So these are the two sources I used for my presentation. Feel free to look through them. They have a ton more information than I have. And also my paper, I can link my paper below to allow you to read more in depth of what I had on here.